The Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura, California, presents a homily by our minister, the Reverend Dana Worsnop, titled Learn Ed to Learn Ing, recorded on Sunday morning, August 30th, 2020.
Good morning and welcome to worship with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura. We are a community of curious people, always seeking to grow our minds and grow our hearts. I am the Reverend Dana Worsnop, minister of this congregation, and I am joined by a whole host of people who collaborate to bring this service into being each week. Here is the lineup of our entire tech team. And today, our director is Brian Fortune. Our assistant director is Andy Edgar Beltran, who is also our magician. And we have tech support from Joe Osborne. The on-screen people will introduce themselves as we go along. Just a couple of announcements, wanting to make certain that you note that the board is beginning a practice of hosting a happy hour, just to talk to people about how things are going in the congregation. It'll be first Thursdays at 5 p.m. There's a Zoom link and it starts this Thursday, the 3rd of September. Also, the county supervisors meeting is this Tuesday, and we still have a chance to make our voices heard and give our input into the 20-year plan for the county, particularly involving our commitment to environmental sustainability. I remind you again, if you need it, to mute your microphones and to stay muted unless you are brought into a breakout room, which will happen at the end of the service. And also, if you can write your name rather than a phone number or iPad and include your pronouns so that we can be gender inclusive. It is good to be together again. Let us enter sacred space.
Good morning. I'm Worship Associate Joe Hutchins. We hope that everyone here has a chalice or a candle to light and something to light it with. Let us light our chalices all together.
I am so very happy to be able to introduce Fidelity Ballmer, who will be our new religious education coordinator. Our outgoing DRE, Emily Carroll, hired Fidelity to cover the program for children and youth through the summer, and so some of you already have met her. Fidelity's first day in this new position of RE coordinator will be this Tuesday, September 1st, though we wanted everyone to meet her today.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you today. I wanted to start out just by saying a really big thank you for the kind words and emails and the thoughtful comments that you have all made during this transition time for our RE program. I've been working as an REA for the last 2 months. It's been so much fun. So Wednesday mornings, got to wake up early to play Zoom freeze dance with our youngest ones, our 5 and unders. That same day, Wednesday, turn around and discuss some of the moral and ethical dilemmas in Nickelodeon's hit show, Avatar: The Last Airbender. And then the next day, go ahead and play some games with our youth group. I'm finding that it's renewing my belief that working with young people is a wonderful way to find and restore hope, especially during some really difficult times. So just to share a little bit about me and my journey, I found my spiritual home at the First Unitarian Church of Providence in Rhode Island while in college. A really close friend introduced me to UUism, and I found that it really fit my heart, and it was a good faith and a good fit for me. Around that same time, I was rediscovering how much I enjoy working with students. So I taught civics education to a 6th grade class, and I taught sex ed to a 9th grade class, and math education when I came back home to Ventura. So these things kind of all combined, and then I got to meet Emily when I came back home to Ventura after college, and it just seemed like a perfect fit to be able to combine my love for UU and also continue to work with students. I'm really excited to take on this leadership position within this community, to help our students, to help our young people grow into their UU values. I know things are going to look really different this year within the RE program, navigating Zoom and technical challenges and all that, but I'm really confident that we're going to be able to find a way to still make it a meaningful and valuable experience. So thank you so much for welcoming me.
Oh, thank you, Fidelity. This is going to be fun. Fun having you with us. Thank you. Each Sunday, this congregation gives away our collection to an organization in the larger community or to funds that help people in our own church. And we are now inviting everyone to donate online. You will see the link for donations on the next slide, and it will also be posted in the chat as a direct link. And today, our offering goes to the Central Coast Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, or CAUSE. It's just to support efforts to protect and extend the rights of undocumented immigrants and farm workers, groups that are especially hard hit by the pandemic and its economic fallout. CAUSE recognize that these groups lack an adequate safety net and set about establishing one. And so they have reactivated the 805 Undocu Fund that they brought into being after the Thomas fire. And they have also called on state lawmakers to provide income support to those in the undocumented community who have lost jobs or hours. The governor has responded to their request and with others, and we now have a $75 million disaster relief assistance for immigrants. CAUSE is also working to be sure that farm workers and non-English speaking groups understand their rights during these challenging times. The work that CAUSE does has never been more important. Please give generously as you always do. So today's service is an invitation for us all to do the curiosity, which is an ancient thread in our faith tradition. For both our Unitarian and Universalist traditions trace a lineage of free thinkers, seekers, and outright heretics going back centuries, if not millennia. Especially from the Unitarian side, we praise the human capacity to think and reason, to learn and to grow as holy. In the language of last week's service, a holy calling. And today, as we introduce our new religious education coordinator, Fidelity, it is fitting also to revisit the words of William Ellery Channing, 19th century founder of American Unitarianism. He wrote, "The great end in religious instruction is not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up their own, to stir up their curiosity. Not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth, to quicken and strengthen the power of thought, to awaken the conscience and moral discernment. In a word, the great end in religious instruction is to awaken the soul, awaken our patchwork souls. Yet we have also, especially on the Unitarian side of our tradition, considered ourselves learned and scholarly. We are founded, it is so, on a fervent love of truth and freedom of thought, yet we can come across also as highly educated people who know a lot. This learnedness was also embraced for and by our ministers. We have spoken for many decades with pride of a learned ministry, which often looked a lot like this. They were almost exclusively men, and they wore these big old-fashioned, big-sleeved robes called Geneva gowns that were popularized among clergy and scholars of the 17th century, and especially by the likes of John Calvin, who was from, you guessed it, from Geneva. And among Unitarian ministers, mostly of the 20th century, it was common to wear academic hoods rather than stoles, and the whole, which they go around the neck and hang down the back. And I have one, but it always felt like it was kind of choking me. And even so, with the big puffy sleeves and the academic robe, the whole dang ensemble spoke to a patriarchal, all-knowing image of certitude. And it's a short journey from honoring education and serious scholarship to becoming authority never to be questioned. Beyond reverence for reason and truth, it says that our ministers are really smart and they know a lot. And I have to say, this particular image makes me smile, and it also makes me think, I resemble that remark. So, things are changing. The Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association recently changed the term in many of our documents. We changed it from a learned ministry to, and speaking now of a learning ministry, emphasizing that we are always learning and growing as ministers and as people. And yes, embracing a wee bit more humility. For 3 years after we are granted fellowship as UU ministers, we are held in what's called preliminary fellowship. And we go through yearly evaluations. And yet after those 3 evaluative years, we used to be granted final fellowship, as if we were somehow done. And we are now switching that term to full fellowship and instituting a clearer path of continuing education. Yes, there is a rigorous course of study and practice and discernment in becoming a UU minister, as there should be. And yet there is nothing whatever final about it. If we are doing our work, we are always learning, growing, evolving. And given the crazy times that have been ushered in by the 21st century, it's about time for us to make these changes. For looking at our congregations, looking in from the outside, it easily appears that we are all educated people, and many, many have multiple degrees. A woman in the congregation I served in Oregon, who came from a working class background, once wondered aloud to me if she really belonged in the church. Some of the people here intimidate me. she told me. And I knew she was speaking about a particular member who was a college professor and truly brilliant. Also kind-hearted, generous, and lovely, though they often spoke at an intellectual level that kept me 1 or 2 or 5 steps behind, always trying to catch up. And so I could honestly respond to her. Some of the people in this congregation intimidate me too, and we all belong. Many UUs are, in fact, an educated lot, and it can be daunting for those among us whose path has not included college or more. And a tendency toward an educated, learned demeanor inhibits some of the diversity we long for. Yet if we expand our identity to embrace the learning, not just the already learned, it speaks directly to a far deeper value at the core of our tradition. For intelligence and curiosity are not dependent on education. Whatever our academic path is, however, we do tend to be folks who are intellectually, spiritually, personally curious. There is the joke about UUs who come to a fork in the road with one sign pointing toward heaven and the other pointing toward a discussion about the existence of heaven. And how many of us would still choose the discussion about heaven? I'm not certain where I stand on that one anymore, honestly. We are curious people who wonder and think and ponder, who question, find some answers, and then wonder some more. We are people who are fascinated by how the world has been designed, who want to keep our sense of wonder ever flowing, who sing praises for minds to probe the heavens. And yet we also know that our science and our art and the breadth of human knowledge are only partial. They only impart to us a partial truth. And when we are always seeking and learning, when we do the curiosity, we may yet curb the error which unthinking faith can breed. By our faith and values, we resist the temptation to justify some terror with an antiquated creed. It is dangerous for anyone to think that we have all the answers or that we can fix every problem. I have spoken before of science as a spiritual path, a truth-seeking path. Yet the scientific method itself is never final. There is a constant process of learning, asking questions, experimenting, creating experiments that sometimes actually yield the expected results, and yet more often don't, which leads to more questions. And these questions are not thought, and these results and the questions arising from them are not thought of as failure, but more information that can lead us down new paths. So anyone who is curious, who is serious about being curious, who wonders and asks questions, will find a home among this ragtag group of seekers and sometimes outright heretics. For the root of the word heretic means to choose, and we get to think and choose and think again and maybe re-choose. For we do want ever to learn and grow and evolve, in endeavors of the mind, and yet also in our hearts, to grow our hearts and our spirits. We seek to awaken the soul, our patchwork souls that grow in compassion and in depth of living. In the 20th century, Unitarian Universalism was defined much more by a sense of religious freedom. The boomers, those who came of age in the 1960s and just after, resisted the dominant, traditional, and rigid Christianity, mostly, of the 1950s, seeking instead freedom of thought and spirit, freedom of religion. Yet the generations that have followed are seeking something slightly different, close and slightly different. Far more of the generations that have followed the boomers are known as the nuns, as in they don't identify with any religious tradition. And if there's ever a survey that says, what religion are you? They check none. Yet that doesn't mean they aren't seeking and wondering and asking questions about the great human dilemma of how we find meaning and purpose. All are still explorers, still deeply seeking what my colleague, the Reverend Christine Robinson, calls the depth dimension of life. They might come to a church, she says, not because they want freedom. They've had freedom. They are looking for something that they can't find in the secular world. Robinson says, if we call ourselves as Unitarian Universalists, if we focus our tradition on not so much anymore religious freedom, but about how we are spiritual, but not dogmatic, it can speak both to freedom and to the ongoing human process of being a learning community. Another shift that is happening in our culture and among ourselves as Unitarian Universalists is less emphasis on an individual search for truth and meaning, leaning more to learning together in small groups of seekers, of scientists and mystics and poets and doubters. Remembering that we are a restless group of people and that restlessness and doubt are signs of grace coming together to experience and explore grace with one another. And people are seeking groups where they can be known deeply, where they can be seen and see one another, where we become companions on a path together. This is a shift that began before COVID times, and yet the need for it has been highly clarified in these last months. And our congregations, this church, can become more consciously and deeply just the sort of place for people to explore the depth dimension without dogma or rigid rules, where we can be a learning people, where curiosity is nurtured and taken seriously, where questions are asked and answers are even sometimes found, where all of who we are is welcomed, what we know from experience, what we are still learning, what our patchwork souls show about ourselves. And what better way to learn and grow than in a shared endeavor, and nowadays a shared endeavor where we can be in small groups together. And this is also what we've been hearing from people who responded to the recent survey. People want to connect in small groups. Yes, on Zoom as we are, and carefully, physically distanced in small groups that may meet outside on our church grounds. And soon we will have another round of covenant groups. Our intrepid adult programs team is creating all sorts of gatherings. Music director Carolyn Bierke and I will soon be starting a small group ministry called Wellspring, which is meant to explore our Unitarian Universalist history and heritage, and our spiritual expression and spiritual practices as you use. Being a learning person, far more than a learned human, always begins with learning about ourselves, about our patchwork souls, as Elmer the elephant learned. And it is always, ever and always really important to know ourselves and to be our fullest selves. And yet, as important as that is, it only takes us so far. And somehow, when asking bigger questions, we need each other in our interconnected and overlapping webs. And given that the world is so topsy-turvy, we need each other even more and even more, because it feels like the ground is constantly moving under our feet. And the world is telling us we're supposed to know new things all the time, see things newly all the time. And one of us, and this is partly also why we need groups, because one of us gets one part of it and then somebody else gets the other part that I never even thought about. And together we can learn. And it's not in this about being right and knowing it already. It's about learning. It's about experimenting and thinking about it as a scientist when we don't get it right, when the outcome doesn't happen as we expected it to, not to see it as a failure, but as a chance to learn something new, walk down a new path, gain a new perspective. And this is a fabulous thing for us to do together as a religious community, especially now in small groups, helping each other through it all. And there is so much to learn. The social shifts that can feel like an earthquake now have actually been developing for years. And though doesn't it feel like any number of things have tipped just in the last few months? And perhaps it is that the pandemic pulled so many things into a sharper focus. And here we are alone with ourselves and our families and our homes and gathering pretty much in small groups together on Zoom. And all of a sudden the events of the world are coming into sharper focus. And wow, we still have so much to learn. We can do this hard thing. I am so grateful that we are in this together. I am grateful to know that restlessness and doubt, uncertainty, and that kind of almost a little bit freaked out anxiety, but this is new and it's exciting, but I'm not certain where I'm supposed to be or what I'm supposed to think now, that this whole thing is happening all at once and that we get to be curious about it, learning about it, letting go, of whatever the voices in the culture that you've heard before that told us we are supposed to be learned. We're already supposed to know this thing. May we continue to praise the source of faith and learning that has sparked and stoked the mind with a passion for discerning how the world has been designed, how we are designed, how we are called to compassion to grow not just our minds, but our hearts, and to lean upon one another as we learn and grow and unfold. May we be a learning community. Amen. And may it be so. And so I now invite us all into a time of meditation. Settle into your sacred center. Find a comfortable spot. Stop that other thing that you are doing while watching, being part of worship on Zoom or on YouTube. Stop that thing and breathe. A silent meditation. Holy beingness of many names and no name at all. Mystery beyond all naming. Spirit of life and love. Source of wonder, which dwells within and among and beyond us this day and always. May we never cease from learning and growing, wondering, embracing what is new and different, that pitches us into new perspectives with new ideas, things never imagined. May we find not solid ground, but a ground together with one another where we can explore and grow our minds, yet grow our hearts in greater compassion as we see more clearly what is unjust, what is not fair, what is broken and has not functioned in our culture, in our society for years and years for more people than we have realized or fully acknowledged. May we move together with curiosity and not fear of the unknown. May we know that restlessness of spirit, that our doubts, and yes, even our fears can be a source of grace and learning and growing and deepening our patchwork souls. And may all those who are ill find healing. May those who are in despair find hope. May those who are without shelter find home. And may all those suffering conflict and war, may those protesting the deaths and shooting of people like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Jacob from Kenosha, may they and we know peace. Amen, and blessed be.
Please join Reverend Dana in extinguishing your chalice at home. We extinguish the chalice, but not the light in our hearts and the warmth of our community and the connection that we have felt here today. We carry all of those into our lives until we gather again. Blessed be.
Go forth in peace. Go forth in good health. Go forth in love. Go forth and be curious. May it be so.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Learn Ed to Learn Ing, presented by the Reverend Dana Worsnop, recorded on August 30th, 2020, for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura, California.